Chapter 11. Food for plants and animals. Key points. Photosynthesis. Peculiar plants. Feeding habits of animals. Food chain. Food web. Teacher, we get our food from plants and animals. Animals too depend on plants. How do plants get their food? What do different animals eat? Plants do not get their food from anyone. They prepare their food on their own. Different animals eat different types of food. We know that all living things need food. Human beings and animals directly or indirectly depend on plants for their food. However, green plants make their food on their own. Photosynthesis. Green plants make their food through the process of photosynthesis that takes place in the leaves of plants. Hence, leaves are called the food factories of plants. Since the plants make their food, they are producers or autotrophs. Plants require carbon dioxide, water, sunlight, and chlorophyll to prepare their food. They take carbon dioxide from the air through small openings, called stomata, present on the leaves. They absorb water from the soil with the help of their roots. Chlorophyll is present in the green parts of the plant. It traps the energy from the sun. During the process of photosynthesis, plants produce sugar and release oxygen through the stomata. Oxygen is necessary for animals and human beings to stay alive. Chlorophyll plus water, plus carbon dioxide, plus sunlight gives sugar plus oxygen. The food prepared by plants is stored in different parts like roots, stems, leaves, seeds or fruit in the form of starch. They use some of the food for their growth and survival. Peculiar plants. Moles and mushrooms. They are non-green plants. They do not have chlorophyll and cannot make their food. Such plants are called fungi. Mushroom is also a fungus. It grows on the dead and decaying plants and animals or on the stale food and get its food from them. Let's go an extra mile. Mushrooms contain about 90% water. Insectivorous or carnivorous plants. There are some plants that eat insects. They are called insectivorous plants, such as sundew, Venus flytrap, and pitcher plant. These plants cannot fulfill their nutritional requirements from the soil in which they grow. Hence, they depend on insects to get these nutrients. Their special structures help them capture the insects. The Venus flytrap has jaw-like leaves. As an insect sits on the leaves, they shut and the insect is captured. The leaves of the pitcher plant are in the shape of a pitcher. Their cavity is filled with a sweet-smelling nectar which attracts insects. When an insect enters the leaf, its lid is automatically closed and the insect gets trapped. The leaves of sundew have thick growth of hair with sticky liquid. This liquid shines in the sun and attracts insects. When an insect sits on the plant, the hair on the leaves capture it. Parasitic plants. Some plants depend on other plants for their food and water, as they cannot produce their food. They are called parasitic plants. Dodder or amar bell is an example of parasitic plant. The plant from which they get their food and water is called host plant. Feeding habits of animals. Animals depend on plants or other animals for their food. Hence, they are called consumers. Different animals eat different types of food. Some animals eat plants and are called herbivores, such as zebra and deer. Some animals eat flesh of other animals. They are called carnivores, such as lion and snake. The animals which eat plants as well as the flesh of other animals are called omnivores, such as bear and crow. Some animals depend on the leftover flesh of animals killed by other animals. They are called scavengers, such as hyena and vulture. Bacteria and fungi are microorganisms that obtain their food from the dead and decaying plants and animals. They are called decomposers. Food chain. All living beings are interdependent. on each other for their food. A food chain refers to a series of organisms linked together in an order, in which they feed on each other. As the plants are producers, every food chain begins with green plants. Therefore, plant-eating animals are the first consumers, while flesh-eating animals are the second consumers in a food chain. Look at the food chain given below. It is a food chain on land. Grass is the producer, which is eaten by a grasshopper, which in turn is eaten by a frog. The frog is the food of a snake, and the snake in turn is eaten by an eagle. Now look at the example of a food chain in a pond. Food web. A food web is like a food chain. However, a food web is much larger than a food chain. Organisms of a food chain can be eaten by organisms of another food chain. It means an organism can be eaten by many organisms. There are many animals which eat green plants. These plant-eating animals can be eaten by many flesh-eating animals, which in turn can be eaten by other flesh-eating animals. Thus, many food chains are interlinked. This forms a food web. Food chains and food webs are very important in nature when it comes to maintaining the natural balance. If any member of the food chain decreases or increases in number, it affects the whole food web negatively and the nature is adversely affected too. Elder talk. We know that mushroom is a type of fungus. Some types of mushrooms are edible while others, especially wild ones, may be very poisonous. New words. Herbivores, animals that eat plants and plant products. Insectivores, animals that eat insects. Carnivores, animals that eat the flesh of other animals. Photosynthesis, food-making process in plants. Omnivores, animals that eat plants as well as flesh of other animals. Scavengers, animals that depend on leftover flesh of other animals. Decomposers, microorganisms that obtain their food from the dead and decaying plants and animals. Read and recall. Green plants can make their food themselves. They are called producers. Plants use carbon dioxide, water, chlorophyll and sunlight to make their food. Moles and mushrooms are non-green plants. They cannot make their own food. Sundew, pitcher plant and Venus flytrap are insectivorous plants. Parasitic plants grow on other plants to get their food from them. Animals depend on plants for their food. Hence, they are called consumers. All living beings are linked to each other in a food chain. Many food chains form a food web.